Hour of 5 o'clock having arrived, I would like to call to order the regular meeting of the Vallecitos Water District for June 7th, 2023. Before I begin, I'd like to announce that members of the public may watch the meeting via computer or smart device by going to the district's website, clicking on Watch Live icon. However, they will not be able to participate in the meeting remotely. Members of the public may also listen to the meeting live on their phone by dialing 888-788-0099. When prompted, enter the meeting ID and passcode displayed on the district website. And with that, the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Simmons, would you mind leading us? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let's see. Roll call, please. I don't see anything up on my screen.
Pass it down.
Oh, is it off? No. Thank you. All right. All right. Very good. Additions to the agenda. Do we have any additions?
We do not.
Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Vote, please. And approved unanimously. Public comment? No public comment, thank you. Presentations, General Manager.
Yeah. Thank you, President Hernandez. So the first item before you is to recognize a milestone achievement of one of our sister water agencies. The Santa Fe Irrigation District is turning 100 years old this month, so that's pretty amazing. So Santa Fe Irrigation District, they represent Rancho Santa Fe, Fairbanks Ranch, and the city of Solana Beach. They're having an event to celebrate their 100th anniversary. It's on June 21st at 10 a.m. and it's at the San Dieguito Reservoir. They are looking for people to RSVP if you do want to attend. And if you do attend, wear proper footwear. It's an outdoor event, so closed-toed shoes, no heels would be recommended. So great accomplishment. There is a proclamation, which I think you've all signed, and we're going to forward it to them. They're planning to put all the proclamations that they receive on display at the event. So
Perfect. Yes.
And that's it. So good event, amazing, 100 years.
100 years.
So we will be in the year 2030, it'll be our 75th. So it's never too early to start planning, but it's still a ways away. But that'll be our next big milestone. So
Very good.
that's it for that item.
All right, thank you. Consent calendar items. Anybody wishing to pull an item off the consent calendar? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Very good, please vote. And it passes unanimously. On to action items, Vallecitos Water District recommended fiscal year budget. Oh, this will be exciting.
So this is the last step in a long journey, and we're going to try to keep this presentation pretty short. You've heard it many times, so Wes will walk us through it, but happy to answer any questions you may have.
Move to approve? Oh, a little too short.
I almost seconded that.
There it is. Good evening, President Hernandez, members of the board. Tonight we'll be presenting on the recommended budget for fiscal year 2024. It has been a long and exciting journey, and this may be the last time we get to see the budget party page this year. Don't worry though, it'll be back next year. So Tonight's presentation is going to be very similar to the 17th, but much, much shorter. There haven't been any major changes to the budget, so I'm just going to go through it quickly and briefly. And the agenda for tonight, we're going to go over the budget process and calendar. Then we'll talk about the changes from the last draft proposed budget. After that, we'll go over the operating expenses and revenues, then the salaries and benefits. Then we'll talk about the capital budget, the reserve balances, and finally, staff's recommendation. So the budget process and calendar, this slide here shows that this meeting tonight is basically a culmination of about 5 to 6 months worth of work and 5 meetings with the board and staff. And tonight we are presenting the recommended budget for approval and hopefully crossing the finish line. He's very excited, you can tell, as we are.
This is the meeting you should have worn your medal.
You're right. You're right. I could wear all of my medals now. I have 2 first place.
Now you're bright.
I didn't bring it up. In my defense. But thank you, though. So, changes from the draft proposed budget. So there haven't been any major changes, as I mentioned. However, the Water Authority did meet on June 2nd, and they discussed some options for their potential rate increases. So we've incorporated, they actually presented 2 options. One was for 9.5%, the other one for 8.2. The more likely sounds like it's 9.5, so we've now incorporated that into the recommended budget. And that actually resulted in a decrease in our operating purchases, or our water purchases, of $84,000. So not a major decrease, but a change in the budget. Then we've also increased the amount for the Poseidon Leadership Program. The previous budget had $25,000 in it, and this one now has $35,000, so it's a $10,000 increase. And finally, we added a page to the recommended budget. We just added page 120, which shows our debt service by source, and also by funding source. There's no impact to the budget for that, it's just information only. Those are the only changes that have been made since the draft proposed budget. So moving on to the recommended budget. The total recommended budget for fiscal year 2024 is $103.7 million. That's the 1-year budget that's being brought forward for approval tonight. And you can see the top part is the reserve funded portions. That's the capital, the vehicles and equipment, and the debt service. I'll start by going over the operational components down bottom. And water operations is $14.3 million, or 14% of the budget. Breaking down water operations, this is on page 10 of the recommended budget, and we can see the total operating expense is $51.1 million, but that $14.3 million is actually made up of $8.9 million of operations and maintenance, $3.6 million in general administrative, and $1.9 million in engineering. But by far the biggest portion of the $51.1 million is the $36.8 million, or 72% of the budget, for water purchases. So as I mentioned, the Water Authority is talking about putting through a rate increase of 9.5%. So when that happens, we have to look at increasing our rates and passing those costs on to our customers, because it is 72% of our operating costs.
Question?
Yeah, how current is that information?
So that was the June 2nd meeting, and we got a letter this morning that said that they're more likely to go with the 9.5%.
We have more up-to-date information than I do. So.
Yeah. It just came in my email this morning. We opened it up. Mike showed it to me, and we talked about it.
Thanks.
So. And we went with the 9.5, I think it was last week. We just assumed it would be, and that's what it sounds like it's going to end up being. So moving on to the Water Authority and the assumptions and significant events. As I mentioned, they actually are presenting a 9.5% wholesale increase. The other option, which has still got a potential, a small chance for happening, is the 8.2%, but it's not likely. And then our internal assumptions, we actually are assuming, based on the 9.5%, we're passing through what we're allowed to pass through, which is capped by our Prop 218, which is the 6.5%. So that's included in the recommended budget. And if we were allowed to pass through the full 9.5%, we actually would collect $992,000 more. So our Prop 218 is reducing the amount of revenue we're able to collect by $992,000.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I think it's important to point out that we did take that measure in order to insulate our customers a little bit from the anticipated, at that point, it was a double-digit increase. So while we are leaning into our, while we are reducing the amount of revenue that we can bring in, we're balancing that with what we have to do right by our customers. So I think it's important just to note that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next slide shows the water purchases as a percentage of total operating budget, and we mentioned that it's 72% of the budget, and that's where it's at this year in fiscal year 2024. By 2028, that's projected to be 74%, so it's only increasing as a percentage of our total operating expenses. Moving on to water sales. Water sales are budgeted to be $33.8 million. We did assume a little bit of a bounce back because we've had a couple of rainy years, especially this year's been a really rainy year. And that assumption is built into the water sales as well as the 6.5% pass-through increase. Overall rate increase is somewhere around 6%, between 6 and 6.5. Ready to serve is budgeted at $15.6 million, and pumping cost is budgeted at $435,000. And then a sensitivity analysis, just to give you an idea if we're off on our demand assumptions. If demand were 10% lower than we've assumed in the budget, then we'd have to draw down reserves by $1.6 million. If demand happened to be 10% higher than we have built-in assumption in the budget, we'd actually be transferring $1.7 million more to reserves. That would be the net impact of those assumptions. Next, the water cost. This shows the water purchases by acre feet and by source. And we can see that by far the most expensive source of water we have is desal, and we are contractually obligated to purchase 3,500 acre feet of desal water. We're also contractually obligated to purchase the OMWD water. And the budget includes an assumption that we will purchase 15,000 acre feet of water for a total of $36.8 million. Back to the home page, again, page 2 of the recommended budget. Next, we'll talk about the sewer operations. And sewer operations are budgeted at $15.2 million, or 15% of the total budget. And breaking that down, this is on page 20 of the recommended budget, and this shows the sewer operations by function. And we can see by far the biggest portion of the sewer operations is for water treatment and Encina and the Metal Art plant. Next, we are going on to sewer revenue. Sewer revenue is budgeted at $18.2 million. There are no assumptions for rate increases in sewer revenue this year, so it's steady from 23 to 24. Reclaimed water sales is budgeted just based on the actual reclaimed water expenses. We just budget to recover those because we bill them to Liebenhain and Carlsbad based on the actual reclaimed expenses. And then we have other revenue budgeted at $297,000. Next, we'll talk about salaries and benefits, and this slide shows the budget to actual for salaries at the bottom for the last 5 years. And then we have budget to actual for benefits on the top for the last 5 years. And basically what this shows is as a result of efficient operations and management scrutinizing positions as they become vacant, we've been able to keep salaries and benefits very stable over the last 5 years, and even actually realizing a budget to actual savings. And actually 2024 has got the biggest increase, and that's as a result of the new MOU that we just entered into.
And JPIA increases for?
We did have some, group insurance increases this year. So back to the home page, now we'll talk about the capital portion of the budget. And it's important to note that this $30.3 million of capital shown here is the 1-year capital budget that's being brought to you for approval tonight. We also do a 5-year and a 10-year capital plan, and that 10-year capital plan is $137 million. And that's for financial planning purposes. And looking at the capital by year and by water and sewer, in this chart here, we can see that of the $30.3 million budgeted for 2024, of that 8.2 is for water projects, and then $22.1 million is for sewer projects, and of that, 5.5 are for Encina Wastewater Authority capital projects. Looking at the 10-year capital costs, the total is $137.4, made up of $35.5 million in water projects and $101.9 in sewer projects. And of the $101.9 million in sewer projects, 30.1 are Encina Wastewater Authority capital projects. So that's the capital budget. Now that we have the operating expenses, the revenues, and the capital portions, we can look to see how that actually affects our reserve balances. So now looking at water reserves in total, as we've presented before, the reserve policy states it will maintain a floor and a ceiling or maintain at least a floor, but it provides the floor and the ceiling for our reserve balances. The floor is 6 months of operating expenses plus 10 years of projected system replacement costs, and the ceiling is 6 months of operating expenses. I went backwards on that. It's 3 years of projected system for the floor, 10 years for the ceiling. So 6 months of operating expenses, 3 years for the floor, 10 years of the ceiling for projected system replacement costs. So those are the floor and the ceiling. The reserve balances are projected to be $44 million for 2024, and even in 5 years we'll be at $33 million, which is still above the floor of $23 million and below the ceiling of $62 and within policy limits. Moving on to wastewater reserves. Wastewater has the same floor, 6 months of operating expenses plus 3 years of projected system replacement costs. I got it that time. It's only the fourth time is the charm. And then the ceiling is 6 months of operating expenses and 8 years of projected system replacement costs for sewer. And these reserve balances are projected to be $60 million in 2024. And even in 5 years, we are projected to be at $55 million, which is above the floor of $41 million and below the ceiling of 92, so within policy limits for wastewater reserves. Next, we'll look at days in cash. Days in cash is an important rating criteria that's looked at by Fitch and Standard & Poor's, combined with other key rating factors like revenue defensibility, low operating risk profile, and our flexibility in rate setting, amongst other factors. But Fitch and Standard & Poor's look at this and they decide what rating to give us. It's important to note that we've actually had a AA+ rating since about 2012, 2013, I think we were upgraded. So we've maintained that AA+ for 10 years. And part of that is because of it, we've maintained our days in cash and sufficient reserve levels. And we can see in this chart that in 2022 and 2023, we had about 713 and 675 days in cash, where it spiked. That was directly a result of the debt issuance. So we had a cash infusion, which raised the amount of cash we have. But as we spend those funds on capital projects, it's budgeted to come down to 555 days in cash, which is slightly below the median. The median is a criteria they use. They look at the industry and say, what's the median for the water retail industry? It's not necessarily an end-all be-all. We don't have to make the median, but it's something that Fitch kind of compares us to other agencies by. So although our days in cash will be down to 374 by 2028, we've had discussions with Fitch, and that should be a good enough days in cash based on our other criteria. So with that said, staff believes that our overall revenues and rates included in the recommended budget are sufficient to maintain our reserve levels and debt service coverage and days in cash required in order to maintain our credit rating. And with that, staff recommends adoption of the fiscal year 2023-24 recommended budget. And there's the finish line. It's right there, right in front of us.
Do we have any questions? No questions?
Just a big thank you.
Yes,
That's a lot of time.
And with that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the recommended budget for 23-24.
Move to approve, as Wes presented. Thank you so
And I'll
much.
second that myself. Go ahead and vote. And it is unanimous. Very good. Moving on to 2.2, resolution declaring intent to reimburse certain expenditures with one or more issuances of a tax exempt obligation.
Let me just take it. Okay.
Wes will cover that item.
So this item is in conjunction with the budget. Basically what this says is that we're creating an inducement resolution so that we're able to debt fund projects in the future. It does not in any way obligate the district to issue debt. All it says is that the projects that are listed in the capital program in the future, if we decide to issue debt, they will be eligible for debt funding. So you can do up to 3 years typically after the budget. If you issue debt, you can go back 3 years. If you don't do an inducement resolution, you're not able to do that. So it's just creating that possibility for the district. So we do this on an annual basis to designate all projects to be eligible for inducement.
So how is it set up now?
Well, that's what we did last year too.
Same thing?
Yeah, every year we've done
Just
this.
annually, we have to
Right.
unless we change.
Yep, so that the projects that are listed in the budget are eligible for reimbursement in the future from debt proceeds, should we decide to issue debt. But we don't have to, has nothing to do with actually issuing debt.
Very good. Any other questions? Entertain a motion to approve the reimbursement of expenditures.
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
Go ahead and vote. I don't know why mine is not taking it. Very good. And it's unanimous. Very fine. Item 2.3, Encina Wastewater Authority Fiscal Year Operating Budget.
And I'll take that item, President Hernandez. So as the board knows, we are a member agency of Encina Wastewater Authority, one of 6 member agencies. And just like us, they approve a budget every year on the capital side and on the operating side. So during the current fiscal year, 22-23, they are actually overspending their approved operating budget, and they have to adjust or amend their budget. So they're actually spending projected to spend about $1.3 million more than their approved budget. On the operating side, that's about a 7.2% increase over what was approved. And it's primarily three factors: energy, which includes both natural gas and electricity. Chemical costs have gone through the roof, and the disposing of the biosolids. So those three account for about 85 to 90% of that increase. So our share, Vallecitos' share of that $1.3 million is about $205,000. So our action, so their board approved it, and their board sent it to their joint advisory committee, and their joint advisory committee sends it to the member agencies. All 6 member agencies have to approve it in order for it to take effect. So that's what we're doing tonight, is to designate our approval. And our approval is not just for our $205,000, it's for the entire $1.28 million. But once it's approved, they will bill us for our share. So we'll get a bill for $205,000. The good news is they've actually underspent or projected to underspend their capital budget by even more than this. So our net out of pocket is actually less than the combined that was approved. But since the budgets are approved separately, an operating budget and a capital, we have to take this action. So the item in front of our board is just to approve the Encina Wastewater Authority fiscal year 2023 operating budget adjustment. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Have any questions from the board? Entertain a motion to adopt the resolution approving Encina Wastewater Authority fiscal year 2023 operating budget adjustment.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Go ahead and vote. And it's approved unanimously. The hot item. Item 2.4, Hillside Development Project Update and Policy Decisions.
Yeah, so I'll kick this off, President Hernandez, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Rick Giddings. So as the board knows, we own the property immediately to the east of the property right here. It's the Hillside property. It's about 32 acres. And several years ago, the board gave staff direction to look at monetizing that property. We formed a subcommittee. Originally, it was President Hernandez and Director Sinella, and when Director Sinella left, Director Pennick was placed on there. So we still have that ad hoc committee that oversees the process, but we realize that the other 3 members of the board don't really know what's been going on and where we're at. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is to hopefully raise the knowledge level of all the board members so that we're on kind of a level playing field. We're not looking for any real specific direction tonight because I think we need to allow time for the 3 new late-coming board members to, cogitate on the information they hear. We'll probably come back in maybe August, either the last meeting in July, more likely the first meeting in August, to look for maybe specific direction, although we're happy to take whatever direction the board has tonight. So we, as part of the process putting together the ad hoc committee, we also were authorized to get the services of a consultant who has expertise in land development. The subcommittee selected Rick Giddings. Rick has extensive experience. Rick's over there. Rick has extensive experience when he was working with the city of San Marcos and dealing with publicly owned property that was developed to monetize it. Their purposes were a little bit different, but the end result is the same. In our case, we're trying to lessen the impacts of future rate increases. So any external revenue stream that we can bring in will help defray future rate increases. So that's why we're doing this. So with that, I'm going to ask Rick to come up, and Rick will walk you through the presentation. I'll pipe in as necessary, and feel free to ask any questions you may have. We realize it's been several years of work that's being done, and to ask you to get up to speed in one meeting is a lot to ask, but we'll try to do that. So Rick, take it away.
Thank you so much. President Hernandez, members of the board, district staff, and members of the public, even those that are participating remotely. My name is Rick Giddings. Have been working on this project, believe it or not, for 4 years already. Good things take time. So let's just go through the slides and make sure I hit the right button. Forward and got it. Okay. This is the project we're not going to build on the hillside, as you can see. But I thought it was an interesting sort of entree into the project discussion because 400 years ago, they were building on hillsides. And this is obviously a fairly old project. It's sustainable. And of course, That's what we want for this project. We want a good-looking project. Let's see, more like this, more like this than the one we just saw. But we also want something that is sustainable and will produce lots of revenue for the water district. So where is this project? I like to tell people that it's in the center of the universe, which is the city of San Marcos, of course. And it's immediately east of where we're sitting today on a 32-acre site. You can see on that second slide, we actually caught an airplane going overhead, doing some reconnaissance. And the description of the Hillside Development Project is to take 32 plus or minus acres of long-term leased transit-oriented multifamily project to produce a new and growing revenue source to assist Vallecitos Water District in keeping their ratepayers' water and sewer bills as low as possible. The ownership with the real estate would stay with Vallecitos in perpetuity unless the district decides at some time in the future to sell. The concept also includes that the property is leased to a development partner who entitles the multifamily project through the city of San Marcos, or alternatively, VWD self-entitles the project. The district has requested a transitional residential general plan amendment through the city's general plan process, which would allow up to 45 dwelling units per acre. All right, so what has Giddings been doing for the last 4 years on this project? First thing we did is we did a detailed biological analysis of the site, 32 acres. The bad news is it's loaded with coastal sage scrub. The good news is there are no California gnatcatchers occupying the site, and we've confirmed that as of August 2019, June 2020, and August 2022. So even though it is loaded with coastal sage scrub, it is not occupied. These are the two reports we did. We used Rincon Consultants Incorporated out of Carlsbad to do the biological analysis. They used a sub-consultant called KMEA to actually go on site and spend time searching for California gnatcatchers. Once we discovered that there was significant habitat on the site, we decided, well, how can we mitigate that habitat? So the first thing we did, recognizing that VWD owns a number of properties, we decided, well, let's look to see if they can self-mitigate. So we asked Rincon to go out. They selected 8 of about 20 sites that VWD owns as the most likely candidates. They spent time on each of those properties, came to the conclusion that if the board decides to self-mitigate on your own property, you can do it. You have enough mitigation property that you own already to self-mitigate. The alternative, of course, is to go off-site and buy property in an already approved mitigation bank somewhere in San Diego County. That was accomplished in November of 2020. We had an initial information meeting, which is the first step to submit a project to the city of San Marcos in April 2020. The city was favorably disposed. They certainly didn't jump up and say, we approve it, but they didn't say, oh, well, this is a bad idea. They recognized that it was actually a pretty innovative idea for the district to try to monetize their underutilized property. We went through a variety of scenarios. In essence, the city said, give us a submittal and we'll process it. Since that time, we have continued to monitor the city's general plan process to ensure that the VWD property is designated for multifamily at 45 dwelling units per acre. That's the information meeting summary page. In February 2022, we updated the title report and the Alta Land Title Survey to make sure that we weren't missing something in terms of easements on the property, and that we actually had a secondary access out to Los Vallecitos Boulevard, which we do. So we have access off of Knoll Road, where the operational center takes most of their access from today, right? Just south of Mission Road, and we have a secondary access out to Los Vallecitos Boulevard. Those are the two documents. We also had a conceptual site development budget completed by J.T. Kruer. J.T. Kruer is probably the premier rock and hillside development consultant in San Diego County. They did almost all of the work at San Leo Hills. And interestingly enough, one of our interested early development partners actually had them do this conceptual budget. We did not do it. We didn't ask for it, but they provided us the results. That was in May of 2020. And J.T. Kruer came up with a very direct approach, basically two pads, a 10-acre pad for parking, a 16-acre pad for apartments, and they estimated that the cost at that point to put all of that in, not to build the buildings, just that, was about $63 million. So this is not going to be a cheap project to do, but none of them are anymore in terms of San Diego County. After that, I went out to, and I sent proposals to every multifamily builder that was listed in the San Diego Building Industry Association. That consisted of 10 builders. And I sent them a packet of information, including all of the biological work we had done, the survey, the title report, J.T. Kruer's budget. I gave them about a week and a half to take a look at it, and then I started calling all 10. I was able to basically talk with 9 of the 10. For some reason, I could never crack the code on ComAn and get a senior executive, but I talked to Alliance Residential, the Dinnerstein Companies, Fairfield Residential, H.G. Fenton, JPI Companies, Ryan Companies, Sudbury Properties, Trammell Crow Residential, and Coleridge. And for a variety of reasons, they all passed. Said they weren't interested. So,
Excuse me, Rick.
Yes, sir.
Did they give a reason at all? Anybody reason?
yes, there were a number of reasons. I think the most honest rationale I got was from H.G. Fenton, and essentially John Larea, who's the executive vice president, said, if we're going to go through the brain damage of entitling a project, we want to own it. So I think that was, in essence, probably the fairest answer. I did get another answer from Trammell Crow. They immediately went on Google Maps and looked at it and said, man, that's a big hill. Never heard from them again.
Yeah.
So, but it was interesting that none of them bid. Then we conducted a geotechnical report because we thought that was probably critical to providing worthwhile information to the folks that might be interested in the project. This also included the appropriate biological monitoring, which again confirmed that there are no California gnatcatchers occupying the site. That was August of 22, and Geocon did that work for us. And essentially the outcome of that report is that this property is very buildable. Again, it's not going to be cheap, but they did not indicate that they saw significant blasting requirements. They thought it could be essentially graded. In April of 2022, the ad hoc committee, the general manager and myself interviewed 3 development firms that have indicated interest and expressed interest in becoming the district's development partner. On that same day, we also interviewed 2 engineering planning firms to consider self-entitlement. So we had the development partners in the morning, we had the engineering planning firms in the afternoon, just to get a sense of who was interested and at what level they were interested. And certainly, I think the ad hoc committee got a good education that day, if nothing else. What have we spent over the last 4 years? A total of $132,483.41, covering biological surveys, geotechnical surveys, the Alta survey report, title report, and certainly my time. The initial board direction was that the board wanted to limit risk as much as they could. So the initial direction was to really define the project and determine the feasibility. And I think we have done that through this process. The board indicated they were interested or would consider both self-entitling and partnering with a development partner either before self-entitling or after self-entitling. We worked with the city to define a potential transit-oriented project that would make sense on the property. As you are probably aware, the bulk of this property is within a half a mile of the Palomar College Transit Station. It sits right on probably the busiest bus route, Route 305, that runs from Oceanside to Escondido and back, and it also sits right on the North Inland Rail Trail. So it is definitely a transit-oriented project. Ultimately, we came to the conclusion that it seemed to make the most sense to do a transit-oriented multifamily project on it. And for those of you that haven't looked at the zoning code at the city, most of the property is already in the zoning classification of R310. There is some industrial overlaying the property to the south, but most of it is already multifamily. The city information meeting addressed the feasibility of the proposed project, and at that time, the city was just restarting their general plan amendment process. It had been sort of set aside because of COVID. They were starting back up, and that really provided the opportunity to include this project in that process, and that's why we submitted the transitional residential general plan amendment to the city at that, because the city was going to have to conduct a citywide EIR, which ultimately would save VWD both time and money, whether we self-entitled or went with a development partner. Unfortunately, the city has drawn out the general plan process, and I'll speak to that in just a moment, although we now believe it'll be completed in the spring of 2025. In the meantime, the board authorized some additional work through your budget process, which allowed us to do the Alta survey and geotechnical analysis, which I think provided all parties additional worthwhile data.
Sorry, can you go back?
Sure, please.
I just didn't have time to read it.
Sure.
No, forward.
Forward, got it. Yeah, take your time.
Okay.
I'm running through this, so I don't
Yeah, I mean,
take a
remember,
lot of your
this
time
is
up.
like, we've never seen you.
Sure.
We've never met you.
Who is this
the
guy?
first
I get it.
time that
I
we've
get it.
Seen this, so,
I get it.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Have you considered or approached Palomar and Cal State San Marcos about potential their use of dormitories or extended student housing being a part of it, as you know, paid for by them?
We have talked to Palomar College, considering they're within walking distance. They have indicated an interest. They haven't committed any money to it, but they have indicated an interest that they would like to start providing some students housing close by. So yes, we have not talked to Cal State San Marcos because I think they've got most of their residential tied up with North City.
Anything else?
Me? Okay, great. All right, the city in the general plan process has decided they have to conduct additional analysis on the San Marcos Creek specific plan. And the reason I've been given is they realize that the plan that's in place is unrealistic. It's way too dense, way too much residential, way too much commercial. And so they want to take that time to review that. And then once analysis is complete, the city will reconvene their advisory groups to review potential changes to the creek-specific plan and how that may impact other areas of the city or other properties within the city. From a purely selfish standpoint, I see that as a benefit to our project. to be blunt about it, because I think when they reduce the density in the San Marcos Creek specific plan, a lot of that density is going to have to go somewhere else because they've already committed a certain level of residential growth to the state of California. Again, estimated delay is 18 to 24 months, but during that time, private general plan amendments will be considered. Although there are some unanswered questions regarding allowable densities, this could be addressed through the adoption of a specific plan on this property, which is part of the discussion we had during our city information meeting. Future decisions for your body to consider. Analyze what legal requirements exist to move the project forward, or if there are any that are going to create a problem for us. Discuss and decide on the concept of self-entitlement or teaming up with a development partner prior to self-entitling. If self-entitlement is agreed upon, solicit professional planning and engineering firms to provide proposals to begin processing the entitlements for a transit-oriented multifamily project in keeping with the city's final decision on the general plan. But a specific plan allows us to submit our own plan with our own densities. So in essence, that would be the benefit of submitting a specific plan early. However, the estimated costs for self-entitling are around $1.25 million. If you decided, rather than self-entitled, to team up with a development partner, what we would suggest is you re-interview the two firms. We're down to two firms. We had three. One did not cut the mustard, so to speak. Not that they weren't capable of doing the project, but they didn't spend much time preparing for the ad hoc committee. Or we could go out to a wider audience to see if there are others who may be interested. In a sense, we have already done that by contacting the 10 multifamily builders on the San Diego BIA list. But again, that's certainly a decision for the board to make. Some other options to consider, we can wait for the city to complete the general plan amendment process. Again, estimated to be spring of 2025, essentially delaying any further action until the city confirms new densities and zoning classifications. If teaming up with a development partner, we could move forward today with a specific plan for the site at 45 dwelling units per acre and conduct our own EIR. Or self-entitling, do the same thing without a development partner. Unfortunately, then you need to spend the money versus the development partner. Additional future decisions, and there are many, but I listed some of the key ones that I think are critical. Will the project be considered a public project and be subject to prevailing wage? Will the district provide lease extensions beyond the initial lease, which we have told interested parties would be 55 years? And if you are willing to consider lease extensions, for how long? If you team up with a development partner, what time frame will the district give to obtain entitlements? Will the district provide phasing of lease payments with certificates of occupancy? Obviously, development partners don't really want to be out of pocket for more money than they need to be before they have tenants in the building. This is a big one. The current VWD master plan does not contain this site within a planned use for water sewer capacity. And this should be addressed obviously by a water and sewer study, which the district typically requires of developers. So the question is, do we want to undertake that independently, or do we want to wait for a development partner? And another question is, we are within a half a mile of the Palomar College Transit Center. Some of it is not. If we had a pedestrian promenade through the road that leads into the operational center, we would be that much closer. However, that would require pedestrian gates crossing the sprinter tracks. All right, why are we even considering a long-term lease for the property? If entitled today for 1,000 multifamily units, and I have pulled out 1,000 units strictly for the ease of my math calculations, the property would be worth between $45 and $55 million. The land lease could be worth between 6 to 8% of value. That would be an annual revenue stream of approximately 2.7 to 3.3 million a year to VWD at a 6% valuation rate. And that's without taking into account all of the expenses that someone will have to bear to get the property entitled. Not entitled, the property was initially appraised in 2017 at 1.26 million to 2.265 million. And I doubt that that appraisal is substantially higher today. And if it is, it's probably because the work we've done has added some value to the property. In talking to our interested development partners, we started discussions at a base lease revenue at $500,000 a year. We have since bumped that up based on ad hoc committee recommendation. We're at $1 million a year. Nobody has cried uncle at this point. So we seem to be headed in the right direction.
Can you stay right there for a second? So
Sure.
if we self-entitle, which would cost us 1.2 million possibly.
Well, that's just for the processing, right?
Right. The value of the land would go from roughly 2 million to 50 million.
Once it's entitled, fully
Once it's
entitled,
entitled.
right?
I just want to make sure I'm.
Yeah, no, that's the calculation. You've got it. The interesting thing about self-entitling is you need to make sure that you're self-entitling something that someone wants to build. That's the key question.
And that's a question I have relative to if we were to process our own specific plan. I guess in order to do that, we have to have a specific plan.
Correct.
Showing layout of buildings, maybe elevations, the whole 10
The
yards.
whole 10 yards. Architectural renderings,
Right.
everything.
And then, that would then force a potential developer purchase to adhere to what was on the specific plan, or go back into an amendment, which seems redundant,
Right.
doesn't make sense.
I would agree.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, more on long-term lease. If you teamed up with a development partner rather than self-entitling, we would require the development partner to spend all the money required to entitle the property. We would also require the developer to legally defend the entitlement from litigation. A project this size, unfortunately, will attract litigation. In addition, another revenue source, if the development partner and the board decided that they wanted to self-mitigate the habitat, they could either buy the habitat from VWD and mitigate that way, or they could go out and buy it somewhere else, or VWD could put that habitat into the mix for increased lease revenues. So there's sort of a different approach to do that. The bottom line to why we are talking about a long-term land lease is we believe it can be a significant new and growing revenue source to assist VWD in containing water sewer expenses over time to your ratepayers. And I will be glad to attempt to respond to any questions the board may have.
If I could maybe.
And I
add-
thank you for your time.
Yeah.
If I could add a few things. So the board may remember when we did the Prop 218 process that we have certain non-rate revenue, like our property tax and stuff, you have more flexibility over. So this would fall in that same category. So for example, if you wanted to create a lower rate for certain classes of customers, you could use this revenue for that type of thing. So that's kind of the benefit of it. All along through this process, we've been trying to maximize the return with minimizing the risk, and that doesn't exist, right? It's a sliding scale. If you're willing to take more risk, then you can expect to get more return on your investment. So, and that's why we looked at the two routes of self-entitlement or getting a development partner. But if you get a development partner, you're minimizing your risk, but they're gonna wanna take the lion's share of the upside. So your potential revenue stream on the back end of a development, with a development partner is smaller than if you took the risk and self-entitled it. And this whole issue of kind of tying ourselves to the city, we don't need an answer tonight, but eventually, do we want to continue to tie ourselves to the city's process for the general plan amendment, or do we want to go off on our own? So just to highlight a few of the points that Rick brought up.
Questions from the board? Yes, let's first start at the end.
One, developers, are they more interested in buying or long-term leases?
Nobody has offered to buy the site currently. I would suspect that some have thought about it, but they have the same risk mentality as we do. I'm gonna buy an unentitled site and I don't know that I can get it entitled. Obviously, as we work our way through entitlement, you start shedding risk issues, and that increases the value. But I don't think the value right now is probably significantly different than it was in 2017, and nobody that I'm aware of has approached the district to purchase the property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
I have some
Yes.
questions. Thank you for this background. It's really helpful. If we do go down the route of waiting on the San Marcos general plan to be decided and firmed up, that presumably we're contracting you and your firm for another couple of years.
That's up to the board.
Okay, are you on a retainer right now?
I'm on a monthly retainer, I guess I'd call it that, yes.
Okay. Secondly, I just want to make sure that I understand, if we, this is an opportunity for us to build housing on a site and continuously earn revenue from that housing if we maintain the ownership. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Have there been any discussions about, and this is in the future, of course, but, San Marcos is really behind on some of the categories of the RENA numbers that we are mandated to fulfill. Have there been any discussions around how this might help with those numbers, and is there a possibility for people to look more favorably on this development because we are going to fulfill those numbers?
The city is well aware that they are falling behind on the RENA numbers. We have always assumed on this project there will be at least 20% affordable units on the site. I don't think the city will allow the site to move forward without that. And yes, I think the city will be very happy to see that occur, because it certainly helps them tremendously in meeting their affordable housing numbers.
Sure. So that means very low, and anything
Moderate.
other than,
And moderate. Moderate's still in an affordable category, although I would suspect the city would like to see more very low or low than moderate.
yeah, I think we're topping out at moderate at this point. Okay. Let's see if I had any other questions. I really appreciate you coming and speaking about this. This is the first presentation that I've heard about it. This is a big decision, and I have to say I'm really uncomfortable with only 2 people on this ad hoc committee making these types of big decisions. I think that, in the P3 committee, we bring decisions forward to the board like, a pride resolution or something like that, we get the board to vote on them. This is a big project, and it's a big decision, and I would like to have a discussion, an honest discussion about involving all of us in this big decision, because this is potentially talking about income for years to come. And I don't think the decision should just be made by 2 folks on an ad hoc committee without the input from other people.
Yeah, I'd just clarify, it can't be made by the committee.
Okay.
Right.
Any decision of Vallecitos has to be made by this board and would be made by, so all the committee can do is similar to what you do on your others, is
Great.
review and recommend. Yeah.
I appreciate that, but it's been 4 years, and this is the first we've ever heard of it. So it's helpful to be in the loop, I think, a little bit more. I think those are all the questions I have right now. This sounds like a great opportunity for us, and I think we should keep talking about it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
In defense of the committee, we understood that there's going to be no decisions at the committee level, potentially recommendations, but that the board would be the one to make the ultimate decision on anything that we do, self-entitled, partnership, lease, sell, the whole enchilada. So I want to assure the board that the only thing we've been doing as a committee is gathering information so that we had something to discuss at the board.
Okay, thank you.
Questions on this side, Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Rick, for the
Thank you.
presentation. It's extremely informative, so thanks for that. I guess my question's more for staff. I'm just wondering, what's the nature of the other VWD properties that might be used for mitigation? Are they truly excess?
Yeah, well, we have some property that we could declare surplus. There's a process to go through, but I don't think any of the other properties that we have quite the potential that this one does.
No, what I'm getting at is it's
For the
it's
mitigation.
awfully hard to get property once you give it up. So I just want to make sure, I just want to caution staff that these, make sure these properties are truly access to our future needs.
Yeah, certainly, and that's what we look at. So if we have extra property next to a water tank, we'd make sure, is there a need for a future second water tank
Exactly.
on that site, so we don't give it up? But yeah, we've considered that, but good point, thank you.
Thank you.
Eric?
Say again, the usable space versus parking, you said like 25, 16 and 10?
Yeah,
Is
well,
what it
that
is?
was the JT Kruer analysis. They did not really do an analysis that a builder would do. So they just took it and said, okay, we're gonna make 2 flat pads. And this is what it's gonna cost, 10 acres for parking, 16 acres for apartments. And that probably is why the price tag was $63 million. Because that would require amazing amounts of grading and unfortunately, an amazing amount of removal. I think out of that $63 million, $15 million was taking soil off the site and moving it somewhere else.
Got it. And so in your opinion, it could potentially be more than that usable? Or less?
Well, I think there would be, I think there's enough space on that site when designed properly that you could have 22 or 23 acres of apartments. You probably would not have a separate 10-acre pad for just parking.
Yeah, got it. So generally leaning more favorably towards the usable
Right.
multifamily.
Right.
And then in terms of alternate use of the land and trying to tie it back into the water district, could it potentially be used for water storage or a reservoir, or it's has no capability to
Nothing
be
like
used for that?
The only use that we have currently and that we have a future use for is there's a telecommunications antenna at the top of it. Receives all of our SCADA signals, collects them, and then hardwires it to headquarters here. So whatever happens in the future for development of that property has to contain
built
some,
around
we
that.
have to figure that portion out.
Did I hear you correctly, that if we spent between 1.2 and 1.5 million for entitlements, then the price of the value of the property would increase from 3 million to
Well,
50 million?
No,
Right.
that is just the processing of an EIR, the required reports that the city will require. That doesn't include mitigating the habitat. So there's much more cost than just that. I'm just giving you what I think the costs are to process an entitlement through the city, but there's still other costs associated with that.
All right, very good. All right? Yes, Director.
So we're not looking for any
Manager.
specific direction tonight. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. But we will be coming to a future meeting, and we will be looking for direction then. So if there's additional information that you want us to gather before we come back, now would be a good time to ask those questions.
James, you have a question?
Yeah, Rick, just really quick for the board's knowledge, about how long is your estimate would it take to process an entitlement through the city to get the full entitlement? Is that a year, 2-year process?
At least 18 months.
At least 18 months.
Rick, have you looked at the application of the new affordable state statutes and whether that would alleviate processing time and or cost on zone change with the city? Because you mentioned some of it's zoned residential already. My understanding of that law is it automatically allows you to use industrial zone for residential.
It does, as I understand it, and it may speed up the process. But I'd rather err on the side of, conservativeness than tell you it's going to take 6 months. And certainly the fact that the site is within a transit zone, that also is another feather in VWD's cap, because that also provides some benefits from a processing standpoint.
Craig?
Yeah, just to remind staff, the water authority's in sorely bad need of a new operations center. And I already know the answer to this, but have we totally fleshed out that possibility?
So I met their operations manager, the Water Authority's operation manager, gave a tour of the site to her. It was during the process when they were going through discussions about site acquisition and this didn't pan out very well. They thought it was way too hilly. The costs of leveling it were too high compared to the other properties they had. Having said that, they didn't give us a firm no, nor did they kick us out of their process. I don't know where their process is. I can re-contact Eva and find out if there's still a hope for this.
I feel compelled to ask that question, just to
Yeah.
put that to bed.
Yeah, I'll reach out to Eva Pleiser again and see if if they're considering this at all anymore, if they want to reconsider it. I know they're having a difficult time finding a site.
Very difficult.
In addition to that, Craig, I can tell you that the school district looked at this site for school as well and rejected it.
I'm sorry. Just for my own curiosity, do you have a topo map that you could put up?
I can certainly provide you one. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Well, with that, I think we'll have this in our package, these documents, so we can go through them.
Yeah, we can make the PowerPoint presentation
Yes.
available to all the directors.
Yeah, with the reports.
Yeah.
So that we can, a good friend of both Rick and I, a developer who did a number of developments with the city, I've had discussions with him along the way, and of course, the big question is what it's gonna cost some poor developer. And then what the value of the property could be, because his thought was, if you got it developed and graded and everything, you could sell the property for, 55, 60 million and just buy a treasury note. So make 4% there. But I think my selfish interest is getting more money. So with that being provided, is there any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for your time.
Very good presentation. All right. Item 2.5, regarding Vallecitos financial investments.
Yeah, so that's a nice segue, your comment about investing in treasury notes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So there's been some conversations made in the recent past asking about our investment portfolio and how well it's doing. Just as a brief overview, and I don't want to steal Jason's thunder, he's with Chandler Asset Management, but we engaged Chandler Asset Management 5 years ago, I think it was back in 2018, 2019, 2018, and they are helping us invest a portion of our portfolio, not 100% of it. Staff manages the other portion of it. So Jason is here tonight to talk about what Chandler has been doing with the portion of money that we entrust to them. So with that, Jason, if you want to take the microphone, and again, Jason's with Chandler Asset Management.
All right. Good evening, everybody. So let's talk a little bit about the portfolio, and I think we'll have a presentation up here momentarily. There we go. Thank you. And let me see if make sure that this is working here.
There it goes.
Okay, good. So I'm going to start off here and just give a brief economic update. Then we're going to go into the portfolio itself, explain what we're doing in the portfolio and what we have done, and then take any questions that you may have about the portfolio and what we think about things moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about the economy. The economy continues to grow. We are seeing slower growth that's happening in the economy. A lot of that is related to the Federal Reserve increasing interest rates, which it started to do back in 2022, and we've seen a rapid rise there. With that, you see that the Federal Reserve has increased interest rates to now in the upper band about 5.25%. Remember that they have another meeting on June 14th, in which they will also take that up again as far as what they're going to do. Our focus right now is that they're likely not to raise interest rates at their June meeting, and maybe potentially not at their July meeting. They will have another bit of data that they'll get before that meeting, which would be an inflation report. So that report will be coming out prior to the meeting. But our stance right now is that the Federal Reserve has tightened monetary policy pretty significantly more recently with that rise in interest rates, and so they're likely to pass at this next meeting. With that, this is just going back to April, but you've seen that two-year Treasury note yields have fallen to 4.01. Let me give you a little bit of an update on that, considering that two-year Treasury notes have increased significantly from that. Remember that this was taken before the lifting of the debt ceiling. And so prior to that, the markets were pretty skittish about what was going to happen there. And so with that, the two-year Treasury note is around 4.5%. Why do I focus on the two-year Treasury note? If you think of the average maturity of your portfolio is essentially around 4.5, or 2 years at that 4.5 level right now. And then looking at inflation. So inflation is starting to come down. So on the left-hand side, you can see that is the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, and then on the right-hand side is the PCE, or the personal consumption expenditures. The green line there is what we call the headline number. The dashed line of both of those is what we call the core number. The core numbers exclude food and energy. Typically, the Federal Reserve will look through some of these headline numbers, but what you can see here more recently is that we probably topped out in the summer of 2022 as far as on a year-over-year basis. Since that period of time, we've seen that the inflation has been coming down, but I would say relative to what the markets were expecting, it's a little bit more sticky as far as that's concerned. And also, when you look at the CPI in general, and you look at that rate, which is on a 4.9% on a year-over-year basis, the federal funds rate right now is above that level. And so we do have a restrictive monetary policy just in general, and that's why the Federal Reserve is likely to continue to, A, keep rates a little bit higher until they see inflation come down even more from where they're at today, and B, where they actually might pause at these coming meetings because they really have done a pretty significant amount as far as tightening just in general. This is looking at the gross domestic product. And so this is looking at where growth is headed. I would argue today that the first half of the year was really revolved around inflation. The second half of the year is going to revolve around growth. Is that where is the growth in the economy? Are we going to continue to grow? The table on the left-hand side looks over the last 4 quarters. If you go to the very bottom chart there, you can see that there was a negative number that was on the second quarter of 2022. All the remaining numbers on that very bottom have been positive, but notice that they've all been declining too at the same time. We do not necessarily think there's going to be a recession. What we'd like to say is it's going to be below trend growth. Trend growth is around 1.5% to 2%. So whether it's a recession or not, I don't know if that's going to happen. But I do think that the numbers right now in the economy are really pointing us towards kind of slower growth than we've seen in the past. You can see the right-hand side, that is the graph. The green line there is the green bars, are the quarter-over-quarter changes, and that marine line there is the year-over-year change. And notice how that year-over-year change is pretty much close to zero. And so we're not really necessarily seeing as much economic growth. Also, for the full year of 2023, the expectation is for about 1.1%. And so, yes, that's growth, but it definitely is not what we've seen more recently. And so I don't want to get too bearish on the economy, but definitely I think that when you look at your budgets and we're looking at the economy just in general, I don't necessarily see a big catalyst for growth here. I think that we're probably going to malaise here for a little while, and we'll have to see what happens in the next 6 to 12 months. Here you're looking at the Federal Reserve. And so on the left-hand side, you can see that's the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. It ballooned up right after the great financial crisis. We thought around $4.5 trillion was a big balance sheet. And then we came into the pandemic, and basically you're looking at around $9 trillion is where it topped out. From that period of time, you've seen that it's come down. Remember that the Treasury, or the Federal Reserve, is no longer buying Treasury and agency securities for its balance sheet, and that's why you see that trajectory downward. If you look more recently, that little curl at the very end, so everybody remembers some of the banking issues that were happening, i.e. deposits that were moving away from retail banks and things like that. Well, the Federal Reserve opened up a facility for that where they could pledge assets and get cash. That's essentially what you're looking at there. So as that has trended downward too, we've also seen where the banking issues, at least at this point, have trended downward. Having managed portfolios through 08-09, that is something that we are continuing to monitor because we saw kind of the similar thing in 08-09, and things got a little bit worse from there. So that is definitely something that we're monitoring. When you look at the effective Fed funds rate, this is the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. I don't think I have to tell you, but if you look at December 2021 all the way through 2022, the Federal Reserve increased interest rates dramatically, something that we haven't seen since Paul Volcker and probably the late 70s and the early 80s. And so this is where you've seen where bond prices and things like that have not done as well as other types of investments. That's because we're starting to see those rates increase. If you are an investor, you definitely can start to reinvest your money at some of those higher rates over that, that you have today, especially in some of those more liquid funds that you have. This is looking at the yield curve Left-hand side, the dotted line there is the 2-year Treasury note, the dashed line there is the 5-year, and then you have the 10-year Treasury note, that solid green line. It's an inverted yield curve. Essentially, that longer-term rates are lower than that of shorter-term rates. And so what you're looking at here is something that really isn't very normal. It doesn't take place all the time. Typically, shorter-term securities have lower interest rates than that of longer-term securities. This is typically happens when the Federal Reserve is increasing interest rates, which they are today, and the inversion that we have today is pretty wide and has been around for a little bit while. Now, and the reason being is because we really have seen the Federal Reserve increase those interest rates dramatically. You can see that on the right-hand side. If you look at those yield curves, you can see the dotted line there is from a year ago. The green line there is the most recent yield curve, and you can see how that inversion has happened more expansively than it has over the last 12 months. Any questions on the economy? All right. Let's talk about your portfolio. And so really your portfolio, when you look at your portfolio, its primary tenets are safety, liquidity, and finally yield. And then it's really benchmarked against the 1 to 3 year U.S. Treasury note of securities. And then in order to achieve those goals, it's really looking at high quality fixed income securities that comply with your investment policy and California government code. I wanted to set the table what the investment philosophy and strategy is of the portfolio that we're looking at today, and also what that investable universe is today. In general, the district can invest in U.S. government and corporate securities that have a credit rating of A or better, with an emphasis on capital preservation. The other piece of that is state law and the district's governing policies do not permit the purchase of individual stock. So you can't own stock in the portfolio. It has to be all bonds and or fixed income. So it's a very limited scope that you can invest in, and that's per the California state law. The section of code that actually really stratifies that is California Code 53601, and that has about 95% of that.
Does that not include ETFs and other?
You cannot buy ETFs either, and so that doesn't allow for you to buy any kind of ETFs. And also, if you were to buy any kind of mutual funds, so it does allow for the purchase of mutual funds, it also has to comply with the California government code. So you can't buy a mutual fund that buys securities that are outside of California government code.
Got it. And would you have an example of a mutual fund that would qualify?
There are not any in the state of California at this point, because a lot of them, what they do is they employ like repurchase agreements and things like that, and a lot of times you can't invest in those types of securities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Also, when we're looking at it, when we look at the portfolio, it has to do a couple of different things. One, it's got to provide liquidity. The second piece of that is we manage the portfolio using a disciplined approach. The other thing is we look to enhance the portfolio's value over time by looking at diversification and also at potential returns. And then through all market cycles, we have to look at balancing both risk and return over that period of time. This is looking at a yield comparison of the district's portfolio versus that of LAIF. And so when you look at that over time, you can see that that dark gray line there is LAIF. Notice how that comes up and down. And then the purchase yield of the portfolio is that of green. And what the purchase yield is the yield to maturity at purchase of the securities. And so one of the things that's been a hallmark of the district's investment program is that it's provided consistent income over that period of time. In fact, if you look, we look back historically, and since April 13th of 2018, basically it's been 33 basis points above that of LAIF. So again, we're looking at a longer term strategy when we're looking at that. Also, the purchases on new securities over the last few months here, that's just called since the beginning of the year, have been between 3.75 and 4.25%. And when you're looking at corporate securities, that's closer to 5%. And so when you look over that period of time, the portfolio on a purchase yield basis did not experience those big lows that you had with LAIF during the pandemic. Basically, the portfolio was able to earn consistent income. That helps with two things. One is just the overall income of the portfolio being very consistent. Also, when you're looking at budgeting, you also have the ability to look at that and be able to forecast what your earnings of your portfolio is going to be over time. I would also say that if you don't have a longer term type strategy, I would say also that you actually have more interest rate risk. And here's why I say that, is because you have to reinvest into that interest rate environment with very short-term securities over all environments. And when you look at the 3-month Treasury bill over a period of time, it has more volatility than that of other longer-term securities. So in a lot of ways, when you look at longer-term strategies, they A, traditionally have higher rates of return, and B, traditionally have lower rates of volatility, especially because you don't have that reinvestment risk within the portfolio. Here's looking at the investable universe. I'm not going to go through every piece of that, but one of those, the part on the left-hand side is the Vallecitos investment policy and directives. So basically, you can see all the different types of instruments that can be purchased. Right below there, you can see that mutual funds today are not authorized per the investment policy, but you can see that California Government Code does authorize mutual funds, but traditionally, mutual funds have not been a permitted investment in California because there aren't any that really fit all those other requirements that are up there.
So a question on that. I'm trying to see how to word this. Does the district have any policies that are stricter than state law that are kind of limiting our strategies?
I wouldn't say that at this point in time. They may have some that are a little bit more restrictive, but as far as limiting the opportunity set that you have, I would say no.
It's in line with state law, whatever.
Yes, for the most part.
Is that something that we could do, like a point-to-point comparison? And
Sure.
find out? I mean, because that's low-hanging fruit, right?
Yes. I would say one thing on that is that, and I have clients that run the gamut, you may want to be more conservative. So if I look at your primary tenants, it's safety, liquidity, and return. And so for your district, depending upon what circumstance you're looking at in your budgetary cycle, it's not bad to be more conservative than that of California Government Code. Today, California Government Code, the way that it's written, it has no requirements on some securities like negotiable CDs to where you would have to limit your exposure to any bank. What I would say is that's a misgiving of California Government Code, and there should be a limitation on that in order to do diversification. So I think you have to kind of intermix, A, what they allow you to do, and then B, what you think is appropriate for your portfolio.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Maybe just having the information, though, would
Yes.
be helpful, so we could just, more information is good.
Perfect, yes.
I suspect the next slide is going to be our portfolio, correct?
Yes.
That'll be, my question will be on that.
Okay, perfect. This is just looking at compliance. So this shows that your portfolio fully complies with the investment policy and California Government Code. Here you can see your portfolio. And this is, remember, this is just the Chandler managed portfolio. This is not the other assets that are being managed by staff. And so I'm going to focus here on your portfolio versus that of the benchmark. And basically moving left to right, you can see the characteristic, the benchmark, and then you can see what it was as of 4/30. So you can see your average maturity is 1.71. The duration is 1.46. The purchase yield is 1.56. That's increased from 1.40 just 3 months ago. The average market yield is 4.67. It's a AA rated portfolio, and the portfolio is approximately $52 million. That's increased from $51.5 million.
Over what period of time?
3 months.
Okay. Thank you.
Then if you look at the sector allocation, I'm really going to focus in on April 30 here. So you have asset-backed securities being 7.9%. You have treasuries being 34.4%, supranationals 2.3%. The money market fund is 0.2%. You have corporates being around 20.8%. CMOs or collateralized mortgage obligations being 2.8%, and U.S. agencies being around 31.6%. So have a very well-diversified portfolio in different types of securities. It's not all in treasury securities where we can take advantage of higher yields. We have bought securities that in the portfolio that take advantage of those things.
Can you please explain what a supranational is?
Sure I can. And so we can only buy 3 of them. There's a bunch of them. So what they are, they're a consortium of nations. So think of the World Bank. And basically, there's 3 of them that are out there. The International Finance Corporation, IBIRD, the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and IADB, the Inter-American Development Bank. And so what they do is they go out and basically they're institutions, they're lending institutions. There is a share structure of which the U.S. is one of those share structures, the U.S. government. And then there are other nations such as Australia, Japan, and others that place money or pledge capital to that. They go out and then make loans to other countries. And so let's say you have Jamaica and you have a water project that's going to help things out. Well, they may not necessarily be able to get that funding. So what happens is they actually go out and make that loan to those. These are AAA rated securities, actually by all rating agencies. S&P actually rates it higher than the United States government because you have a consortium of governments that are for that.
So if I'm understanding the previous slide correct, it's 1.82 years for maturity, right? So that you can't liquidate those on an average basis for that period. Is that what you're trying to say there?
Yeah, that's the benchmark, actually. If you go one over there, the portfolio is 1.71.
1.71, right?
Yes.
And so the second tenet of our principles is liquidity.
Yes.
So that's what you consider good liquidity, is 1.7 years?
So we have a couple of different ways when we think about the portfolio, is how much liquidity does this portfolio need? And so at one part of the spectrum, you basically have LAIF and these other liquidity instruments that can take care of near-term needs, and then you have a longer-term piece of your portfolio.
Right, this is the blended average of the.
Exactly. So this is not the entire portfolio, so the blended average of that is going to be much less than that.
Got it. So we could not ditch everything and go to treasuries for now.
No, and you have a lot of treasuries today. When you say ditch everything, you're talking about going to very short-term
Sure,
treasuries.
go to 3 months.
Yeah, you could, meaning that you could sell these securities prior to maturity, but there definitely are some accounting impacts that would happen in this portfolio.
Have you looked at those?
What's that, US Treasuries?
No, I mean, like the comparison, like what it would cost to liquidate these in comparison to going to something that is very liquid, much more liquid than this, and is by far making a much higher yield in the short term.
We definitely have and looked at the transactions costs of that, and it would be pretty impactful to the overall financials of the actual portfolio. So we are always looking at those different things. The other question I have when we look at some of those different things that we question ourselves, okay, so it's 5% today. What's it going to be 6 months from to now? What's it going to be a year from to now? And do I try to time that market? And I'll be quite honest with you, that is a difficult thing to do, and that's not necessarily what our strategy looks at. Our strategy looks at to have a long-term expectation and a long-term strategy, and I think timing markets is very difficult to do.
Sure, and generally it's going to go down, most likely, is the expectation. Could go up, but these long-term pieces, these most likely will not change. Right? Like you're going to be able to buy into 1% bonds all day. You're going to be able to buy into 2% bonds all day. You're not going to be able to buy into 5% treasuries all day. Like this is a short-term window to take advantage of, in my opinion anyway. So like what is the downfall? And I'm trying to kind of get to that is like, if you've done the calculations, then what's the penalty?
So the penalty, I believe that I have it in here, is $1.6 million. That is the unrealized gain loss on the portfolio.
To go into making 2.5 million this
Right.
year?
So let me go back, because I think there's an easier way to explain this too. So when I look at the purchase yield of the portfolio, let me go back a little bit more. So when I look at the average market yield of the portfolio, it's 4.67%. So essentially that's marking the portfolio to market. So if I sold all of those securities today and repurchased them, I'm going to get a 4.67% portfolio. My purchase yield today is 1.56%. The reason that's lower is because I have some of those securities that I'm holding in the portfolio over that period of time. And if you think about it, 50% of the portfolio is going to mature off in this 12-month period of time. So you're constantly reinvesting into that higher interest rate environment. That's why you see that purchase yield climbing. It's taking a while for the portfolio to get back up to that 5% because it needs to take time for it to reinvest. But I would also argue on the slide that was before that, the portfolio was earning well above the market rate or the LAIF rate for a long period of time over that. So you got to take those things, I think, and average those together for your long-term strategy.
Just seems like we're significantly underperforming and that there's probably a way that we can do much better than this. And I mean, as my duty to the ratepayer, it feels like I need to get you to do better, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And I don't have firm answers here because I don't have the exact calculations to it, but I mean, my napkin math just said we could be making an extra 800 grand this year. That was,
But in order to do that, you're going to have to take a loss in your portfolio of around $1.6 million to reinvest all that into 3-month treasury bills.
but you still make 800 grand.
But you just lost 1.6, so you're
To make
negative
2.5.
800. What's that?
I said to make 2.5.
Let me go through your math. So what you're saying is that you can make another $800,000 in the portfolio by selling all the securities and going to 5% essentially.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and so, but in order to do that, you're gonna have to realize a loss on those securities that you're selling today.
So, which are making 2%, right?
Well, actually, when you take into account the loss, they're actually making 4.67%.
How does that make sense? You're saying we're making 4.6%, but we're also losing 1.8 million?
So, let me go back. So if I look at this holdings report today, when I look at the unrealized gain loss, it's minus 1.5, almost $1.6 million. Those are the market value of those securities today,
If you rebought them today,
if I sell them today.
then how is it a loss?
Because basically I purchased those securities at a higher price than what I'm going to receive today.
So you're losing money, but making 4% somehow.
So when I value those securities using the current market prices today, it has a yield to maturity of 4.67%.
But that's not what I'm seeing us making. When I look at our investment reports, I see we make like 1.5%. So where's the difference in that?
The difference is that this is the purchase yield to maturity. And I think this is where maybe it's a little bit different. If
Well,
I
mean,
don't,
at the end of the day, what really matters is the money coming into the district, right? And so
Yes.
I see the 1.5%. Am I missing this somehow? Like, where are you getting 4.5?
so let me take a step back here. On a purchase yield to maturity basis, it's 1.56%. This is where we've purchased these securities on a yield to maturity basis. So basically, when you look at that, you're getting 1.56%.
That sounds about what I see in the reports, yeah?
Okay.
And that's about what I see coming in from the income side of that?
Right. And so one of the questions that you asked is, okay, so if you liquidated your portfolio today and you bought, something that was yielding 5%, around 3
Just for example, and going back to that slide, 52 million. We don't get 52 million back. You get 50.
You would-
50.3-ish.
you would actually get, see the total market value plus accrued, based upon the values as of 4/30, you would get $52 million. That's what the value of the portfolio is today.
So all we're doing is accepting a paper loss of, well, like, we're still getting our 52 million back, but we're putting on paper that we lost 1.8 million, right? Is that
Right.
1.6, I'm sorry, 1.6.
Right, so that would be a loss on the portfolio that you would have. That would
And
be
we're starting over at 52 million.
And you would have
now you're
52.
making 5% guaranteed with immediate liquidity.
Right, so let me go back, because I think this is where I think that when I look at that, so if I look at the $52 million there, and I also look at those two yield values, 1.56 and 4.67. That 4.67 yield takes into account the depreciation of those securities.
I mean, we aren't making that money though. So like, what does that number actually matter? You go to your LAIF chart, they're making 3%, we're making 2% or under that. And so what does the 4.67% matter? Like, why even mention that?
The reason being is because if we go to sell all of these securities today,
Yep.
we just sold a portfolio at a yield to maturity of 4.67%.
But that makes no sense because you're not making that money. So where's that number? Like, what does that matter? What does that number matter?
That number matters because when you go to reinvest all of those funds, you're essentially going to be equal to where you were before, because you basically, you have that mark to market today.
Yep.
And so when you mark that to market today, these same securities yield 4.67%. So if I sell all these securities at 4.67% and I buy them all back at roughly that amount, I'm pretty much equal on that transaction.
Got it. So someone else would buy it and they would be making 4.67%.
Exactly.
But we are only making 1.56%. So it would somehow, again, not be prudent to liquidate it to make 5% at this point?
Let me take a minute here. So if we're, because we're talking all about market value now.
Yeah.
Or the market yield to maturity. We're not talking about purchase yields, because basically we've now said that, hey, we're willing to take that loss and we're going to reinvest back into a portfolio. So we're going to sell everything off at these yields that we have today, and we're going to reinvest back into those securities. So that 1.5, when you start talking about selling securities, that 1.56,
Yep.
that whole dynamic changes.
Sure, but then you imagine that, let's say the yield curve inverts, and it goes back, and now treasuries are going down, 3 months or go back to whatever, 2%, 1% a month, 1% a year, and would these not go back down too? I mean, wouldn't this go back to, wouldn't I be able to repurchase them at the 1.5%? Like, they're only at 4.67 market yield, because why would you buy these when you could buy treasuries at 5%? Right? Like, they're not just going to stay up there magically. They're going to go back to where they were before.
Let me make sure I'm kind of understanding what you're saying, is that what you're talking is that these securities, meaning if interest rates went down again,
Yep.
these same securities, see that market value that's $52 million,
Yep.
would actually go up in value, because the bond prices would go up in value because you have lower interest rates over that period of time. Also, your yield to maturity on those bonds would also come down from that 4.67 to whatever that new interest rate environment is.
So you're postulating that bonds would make more than 5% if it went down, if the interest rate of the U.S. government went down?
Yeah, and I'll
The
give you a
Fed?
math calculation on that. So if you look at the average duration, that's your sensitivity to interest rates, is 1.46. That's take if rates went down 100 basis points or 1%. Basically, the value of that portfolio would go up 1.46%.
Then why weren't we making more money before when it was reverse scenario?
From a yield perspective or total return?
Total return. I mean, if
So
that
if you
is
think
indeed
about
what
it,
happens.
if we go back here, see when the pandemic started, the portfolio had huge gains in that because interest rates came down dramatically. So by owning those longer term securities, the price of those bonds went up over that period of time. It's only been more recently that you've seen where the Fed has increased interest rates, where you've actually seen where the value of those bonds has come down.
Yeah, I mean, you can put it however you want. You're significantly underperforming a very liquid, much more liquid than what we have right now. Very easy to obtain in one click sort of security. So you can understand it's very disappointing to the ratepayer who's watching us, ratepayer who's listening on the telephone, and it's my duty to get you to do better. And would like to see how that's going to happen.
Well, I can't really give you an answer to that in the sense that, you know, at the end of the day, it's a longer term strategy. And so, you know, we can't necessarily flip a switch and have things go back to 5%. I mean, that's not something that's going to, you know, I'm also not going to get, feel that with that things are going to go back to some kind of normalized stance.
Can I break in for a second? I wonder if there's an opportunity to do some exploration and come back and show us, taking into consideration some of Director Grosset's comments, and from our perspective, we have a couple of different bosses, right? And one of them is our consumers, our customers. So maybe bringing back some, and, maybe the two of you could work together, or work with Wes and bring back some exploration about some possibilities. It's, because I think right now, we're sort of, yes, you can, no, we can't, yes, you can, no, we can't. And, you're doing a great job explaining, and you're exploring things, which is what your job is. So I wonder if that's a possibility that, we could have you back and
Yeah, and I
listen
would
to
add that
some other options.
Another venue might be the finance committee, because remember, the finance committee is really the finance and investment committee.
Yeah, right.
It's got a longer title, and we rarely use it in that capacity. It's difficult to have these types of conversations at this type of meeting. So if the board was interested, we can kick the item to the finance committee, and then it would come back to here, right, for any action, similar to what we had talked about before, that the finance committee isn't gonna change our investment strategy, but they may make recommendations to the board on how to change our investment strategy.
And I think any one of us can sit in on any committee, right? So, Director Grosset, you could come and we could have that conversation
Yeah,
and
you have
maybe.
to be careful. I'll let Mr. Gilpin talk about that.
Oh, right, because there would be three of
It'd
us.
be a quorum. So
I
right now, I
gotcha.
believe it's
Okay.
Director Zelatharp and Director Boyd Hodgson that comprise the finance committee. Other directors can attend, but I don't think they can contribute to the conversation.
Oh, right,
Yeah, you
okay.
have to attend as an observer, like you're from the public. You could observe the meeting, but not provide input or direction.
Understood. Thank you for that clarification.
Well,
Question again, real quick.
Go ahead.
And I totally monopolized the time here, so I'm ending after this. Just, my understanding, your fees are $50,000 a year, is that correct?
Yeah, they're based upon a basis point calculation based upon the assets under management.
Got it. And then is there additional commissions that you make for purchasing these securities?
Not at all.
Got it. Thank you.
fundamentally, I'm seeing that we're receiving 1.79% on our investments. And I guess the question is, and that's what you're gonna look at and talk to the committee about, is how to increase those to get closer to 4.6. And, even though you gotta sell something and lose, you're gonna buy something and gain. So that's what I understand the committee is gonna look at?
If that's what the board
Yeah.
chooses.
Is that what you were talking about having?
Well, I think that, I want to be mindful that there's probably a productive pathway forward.
Yeah,
And it's good to ask questions, and it's good that we know what you're doing. That's part of our job as well, to have oversight and accountability. So I'm just trying to facilitate some kind of a more productive discussion in a way that we can see what we have, see what we could have, make some explorations. I'm not an expert, but I
yeah,
do recognize that we're not, there might be a better way and more productive way to have this conversation. So that's why I broke in. But if everyone wants to keep having the conversation in this forum, then let's go. We'll keep doing it.
I think moving it to committee is a good idea, with the underlying goal is, for making 1.79, we want to make more. And so what is the potential solutions to do that?
I think that's well said.
Okay?
All right.
Well, they're very good. And go to work.
So we'll take this to committee then.
Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
then, thank you very much.
For information purposes only, David,
Yeah, there's a little bit more that's part of the presentation. So if we go back, basically you have the sector distribution, we went over that. Then looking at the duration distribution, you can see that the district's in the green, and you can see the benchmark is there in gray, and the benchmark is a 1 to 3 year treasury, so you're really allocated across the spectrum there. And then looking at returns, so this is total return. This includes both the income that's made on the portfolio. In addition to that, the unrealized and realized gains, losses in the portfolio. Your portfolio is in the green above, and the gray is that of the benchmark. And you can see over the last 3 months, your portfolio's earned 1.07%, versus that of the benchmark, which was 1.12. Over the last 12 months, 1.19 versus 0.94. Then you have some negative numbers, minus 0.99 versus minus 1.23. Over 3 years, minus 0.44 versus minus 0.74. And then looking at 5 years, you can see 1.37 versus 1.19. And then since inception, 1.37 versus 1.19. And so you can see only over the last 3 months, we've underperformed the benchmark by 5 basis points. All the remaining periods, we've outperformed the benchmark significantly from those points of view. And then you can see the consolidated reporting. And so you can see the amount that's managed by staff. And so you can see the maturity and the duration there. You can see the purchase yield there is 2.9%, and that's around $60.1 million. And then you can see the local government investment pool versus that of LAIF, where those funds are. And then if you consolidate everything together, this is a Chandler managed portfolio along with the liquidity piece of that. The average maturity there is 0.79 years. The duration is 0.68. The purchase yield is 2.27. The market yield is 3.71. It's a AA rated portfolio, and the portfolio is approximately $112 million. And then you can see the sector distribution there. The only difference there is you can see that LAIF makes up around 50% of the portfolio. And then we'll go through the holdings just real quick, and you can see the asset-backed securities, the agency securities, CMOs and the corporates, money market funds, the supranationals, and then also the U.S. Treasuries. And then there you can see some of the transactions. And I can answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions?
I do have a question about our contractual obligations to your firm. Do we, and I don't know if this is standard or not, but do we have benchmarks that that the payment is contingent upon? So if, do we have like a baseline that, our expectation is that we will earn X% return, and if we don't, then?
Like a performance clause or something like that.
Correct.
And that is no, there is no performance clause.
Is that because that is not something that the public sector does typically, or is it because we just have not done it, or?
There's a couple of different things. None of our contracts have that, and we manage over $30 billion in assets for public agencies, so they don't have that. The other thing, there's a risk of doing that, is that if I'm the investment manager and my fee is only predicated on a performance basis, I may have an incentive to take on more risk than you otherwise would want in your portfolio. So it's kind of a two-edged sword there. Yes, you want people to be accountable per the contract, but also you want to make sure that they are also taking the appropriate amount of risk in order to achieve your goals.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Uh-huh.
President Hernandez, before we move to the next item, the board may have noticed that on the consent calendar, one of the items was to amend the investment policy. And all that really did was add another vehicle. So we talked about LAIF a lot. So the item on the consent allows us now to invest in CAMP, the California Asset Management Program, I think it's called. So the portion of the funds that staff manages, we now have another vehicle that we can invest in. So the board approved that item. So I'll say starting immediately, we'll start looking at diverting some of our retained funds to invest in CAMP because they're getting good returns. And then I think at the meeting on July 19th, we're going to have somebody from CAMP come and talk about CAMP. So, but just to be aware, we may start investing in CAMP before you hear about CAMP.
All right, very good.
I've got a question.
Yes, Craig.
Could we get a presentation on our own self-managed portion? Or I don't think we've done that.
Yeah, whether we want to do that at the finance committee or do it at the board, we could do it at the
I
board
think
as
it'd be
well.
helpful for the board to see
Yeah.
that at some point. It's
Yeah,
not urgent.
you saw a little bit in the latter slides that Jason
Right.
presented, but we can focus on that aspect of it.
To that, our self-managed portion is really just in LAIF and the county pool. It's our liquid portion of the investments. LAIF is earning like 2.7%
I
right
think
now.
you show that in the board package anyway.
Yeah, so-
yeah, maybe we don't need to do
But we are working towards a strategy of CAMP. So what we'll do is, CAMP is a much shorter term, higher yield investment pool. So what we plan on doing is when things are good in the market short term, we'll move most of the money into camp short term, and then, you know, if it starts to go down, we'll move into a more longer term like LAIF. It's all liquid, it's what we need for our liquid funds. We have to have the operating reserves in there, we have to have our debt proceeds, and then any capital expenditures that we need. But we can shift them or move them between the two to maximize the yield on the two of those. And right now, camp is at 5.17, so it's looking like an attractive pool to be involved in, and we've cleared that with.
Yeah, maybe just the presentation on that new option would be
Yeah,
good.
we could do that. And so the board may know, the second meeting of every month, we put the investment report in there. We've never walked you through that. So maybe that's a good thing for us
That's
to do
what I
at
was
a board meeting, to help you decipher what's in that. It's pretty lengthy, but some of it is an investment by investment. We don't need to do that. There's some good summary pages, some good summary information so that you can see how are our investments doing. And we can put that on the upcoming agenda.
All right, and nothing further, let's move on to action item 2.6, a resolution of the Board of Directors to electing to have sewer service rates for Improvement District A for fiscal year 2023 to 2024, collected on the tax roll.
Yeah, so this is an action we take every year. It's a two-step process. Wes is going to give you a broad overview, but this is the first of the two steps.
So this is an item that's brought to the board annually for Sewer Improvement District A. And this is a special service area where Vallecitos provides sewer collection services and other agencies provide the water services such as VID and Rincon. That being the case, Vallecitos has elected to have those sewer service fees collected on the tax roll, because you can imagine only having sewer service, if they don't pay their bills, we have no recourse. But by having them on the tax roll, it covers us from that and almost guarantees us the revenue. So that's been the election that we've done every year, so it's brought back. But the state health code actually does require us to bring it to the board annually to re-elect or elect again to continue to collect those on the tax roll, those sewer service fees. So that's all this meeting is doing right now, is just saying, yes, we want to continue to collect the sewer service fees on the tax roll. It's also setting the public hearing date for July 19th, at which time we will bring you the details on what's being collected, and we will be electing to actually collect those funds at that meeting.
Very good. Any questions?
Is there just a fee associated? Is that why, is there some districts that don't utilize that, and why would they not?
It's a minimal fee. Some of the reasons you might not want to is because it's only paid periodically, so the revenue's not available. Like, you can bill sewer service monthly. So if you do it on the tax roll, you only get, you might get quarterly tax return or tax payments from it, so you don't get it as readily available, plus it's managed by somebody else. But it's not costing us, I forgot what I want to say 10 cents per parcel.
10 cents per parcel.
Yeah, so 10 cents per parcel.
Customer.
So it's not expensive to put it on the tax roll.
Okay, yeah.
Craig?
Yeah, and so could you remind us what's the area encompassed by Improvement District A?
It's not a simple bubble.
Generally.
James probably knows, but.
Yeah, so typically it's more on the outskirts, so you got areas of VID along the Plume area that we covered, the Northern District area, which, but majority as far as the population centers are closer to Escondido on the east side, both north and south of the freeway. And there's also some areas on the west side of our district. Basically on the outskirts, we don't service water there, they're serviced by other agencies, but we are their sewer service.
And we can try to bring an exhibit for the public hearing.
And this is just for District A?
Yeah, that's the only improvement district we have.
They only have sewer
I know. Could we not do it for the entire district, though?
Yeah,
Potentially.
That's a policy decision. If the
Yeah.
board chose to collect all of our sewer revenue through the property tax, that can't be done through this process. It would be a longer
But
process.
it would, okay, so this is just strictly for this one,
It's
but,
for this subset right
There
here.
are some districts that do that.
There are. Leucadia wastewater district does that. 100% of the revenue comes through property taxes. They don't send out the monthly bills. So,
yeah, it just seems like, yeah, that's,
but as mentioned, you're getting like 2 disbursements a year, so you have to have good cash flow to allow you to survive the time when you're not getting monthly revenue. But I would bet that the amount that you actually receive, you're probably closer to 100% going through the property tax than you are going through individual bills. And we could try to come up with an estimate of that. How much loss do we have by individual customers not paying their bill and going to debt collection route? That's a certain percentage off the top, whereas with property tax, we're pretty guaranteed. If they don't pay their property taxes, it gets foreclosed, and then we get paid.
Well, and
eventually.
cost of billing and staff and customer service, I'm thinking as well, there's gotta be a portion.
Or the water portion would still be on the billing, so,
Right.
so most of those expenses are already encumbered by the
Yeah.
district.
It's just another line item. Most of our customers are customers of both water and wastewater.
Right.
So it's just another line item on the bill, so it's not that much additional costs. But the reason we do the wastewater this way is because our billing system is based on water customers.
Right.
And then they happen to have a sewer line item on there. But sewer-only customers, they're not in our billing system.
Interesting.
Very good. With that, entertain a motion to adopt the resolution setting a public hearing for July 19th, 2023.
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
Very good. Go ahead and vote. Thank you. And it passes unanimously. Moving on to reports. General Manager,
I have no reports today.
District Council.
In the abundance of time here, just, the Supreme Court issued an opinion in Sackett versus EPA that if you're interested in WOTUS, which is Waters of the U.S., you might want to read it. It did change the jurisdictional limits applicable to the Clean Water Act everywhere except California, because California has stricter requirements that are applied. But if you like the saga going on over the jurisdictional boundaries of the waters of the U.S., it's a good read. And it's Sackett versus the EPA.
Very good. County Water Authority.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll be brief too. The last board meeting was all things budget, way too much deliberation on budget. But, it's a culmination of about 5 earlier meetings, I think. But just one note, the summary of formal board actions for the recommended budget said the board approved calendar year 2024 rate alternative 2B using reserves beyond board policy and defeasement of bonds for an 8.2% effective rate increase. So the information you just got, it's kind of upends that. There hasn't been a board meeting since then, so I'm just wondering how.
I have a letter right here.
Okay,
I'm happy to give it to you.
okay,
It gives you a little more information about that. We got it this morning. I don't think it's private or anything, so.
thank you.
Staff overruled the board.
Yeah, that's my concern. What are we there for as a board?
There were some complaints amongst the member agencies today that I saw emails circulating saying it's unfortunate that we don't have any idea. They're still between the two options, and a little bit of frustration with budgeting because of that. So
So staff said it looks like it's gonna be 9.5?
this is actually from the assistant general manager at the Water Authority, and it looks like most likely it'll be 9.5, but yeah, that's latest. And either way, we want to be conservative just because they're not sure. So we don't want to put 8.2 in there and then have them raise it 9.5.
I'm a little frustrated. I'm still trying to figure out how the Water Authority works. And I've been there 2 years and I'm not quite there yet. So.
Very good. Encina Wastewater, we haven't had a board meeting yet, so stand tuned to that. Standing committees, let's see, yes.
The P3 committee met on the 5th of this month, and we talked a little bit about the water leadership program going forward. It looks like we are going to be targeting one school, potentially 2. The school that we are targeting is an underserved school in SMUSD. I was very glad to hear that, and we do have that in the budget. Let's see what else. We have cycled through another intern. We have a new intern starting, Flavia Oram. She was also I'm actually not going to mention that out loud. she will be, she is a new intern for us. This will be our 4th intern, which is really exciting. Let's see. It was brought up that the SDEDC may have some kind of engineer intern program. Director Grosset brought that up, so we may be looking into that as well and continuing that discussion. So, one of the things that I've tried to do in this committee is continue to train folks so that they can live, work, and raise their families in San Marcos, and we are well on our way to doing that for several folks. These scholarships checks will be distributed on July 9th. I understand we're going to have big, giant checks for a photo opportunity, and I think that that's wonderful. The San Diego County Water Authority is continuing with its landscape workshop, and they are hosting it here at Vallecitos, which is great. That means that folks from all over our area can come, and it's a series, I think, of 5 classes, and it's free. More information forthcoming. I think that's on our website. We are doing a demonstration at Jack's Pond on Saturday, and that will be great for kids. And I think that is, we got an update on the CSU San Marcos Senior Graduate Experience. I received that report. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I think that was a good program generally. Wouldn't you say, Director Grosset?
Yeah, it was great. I reviewed their output. It looked like it was really helpful and a good starting base, and I think we determined it might save us $10,000 or so
Chunk of change.
in setting up for a consultant there.
Yeah, great. And I think that's all that we talked about. So, thank you.
We did have an engineering committee, and we went through projects that are upcoming on the design and the construction. Can't remember what else we may have talked about. But,
Let's see, some asset management update.
oh, yes,
Yeah.
very good. And let's see, directors' reports on meetings. State of the city, anybody?
Yeah, I think many of us went to the State of the City,
Yeah.
and it was interesting to hear, where we are on, kind of economic indicators, and it was a good time to be all back together and
Yeah,
hear how great our city is.
yeah, no, I think it was, the mayor did a good job and gave us some information. We were all there, so that was well worth the go. Any future agenda items?
I just have one quick comment. Congratulations to all the graduates of all of our local colleges and universities. That's happening in the next few days, and high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. Congratulations.
And then director's comments or future agenda items? Seeing none, then I think we're going to adjourn our meeting and stand by for closed session. Adjourned.